Hey guys, what's up? This is Francisco with Barareso Capital, and in this video, I just wanted to share with you a setup that I traded this past week. This was a short setup in UNG, which I have here on my charts. And remember, guys, that this video is just for informational purposes only and is based on my personal opinion, meaning that it's not financial advice. So I wanted to share this setup with you. This is a setup that I trade both in the long side and on the short side, and it's actually a pretty easy setup. For any one of you who's new to my channel, I use two main indicators, and the first indicator that I have in the bottom is the TTM squeeze developed by John Carter, and then the second indicator is the trend oscillator developed by Sam Shames, which is an oscillator, which is a momentum oscillator, and it also is an oscillator that helps me identify trends and when a trend might be changing depending on the momentum that we're seeing in price action. So let's start with the basics here. I basically just trade using price structure, and I only use one exponential moving average, which is the 8 exponential moving average. This is kind of the system that I have developed throughout my years of trading. I'm always looking to simplify my system as much as possible to make it super simple and effective in a way that I can basically explain a child what is it that I'm looking for when I'm looking for setups and scanning through the names and looking for something to trade, and looking for opportunities basically. So as you can see, UNG here, a lot of people were bullish on UNG, and let me just zoom out here a little bit. And of course, a lot of people were talking about the cup and handle that was forming in UNG. You can see that we had the cup. We're starting to see a handle here, which continues to be valid. But I'm a swing trader, right? I'm not looking to get into a trade that is gonna last for months, even though that's pretty amazing. I'm mostly looking for trades in which I can get in and I can get out, and my holding time goes for an average of about 3 to 5 days, somewhere around 4 days. That's usually my average holding time. So I'm looking for continuations of momentum, or I'm looking for reversals in momentum as well. And this trade in particular was basically a continuation of a reversal that we saw in UNG. So let's start here. Let's start with the basics, and let me just go back to the chart. Let me start with the basics here. You can see that UNG, let's go right here, right? We had a pretty strong move to the downside in UNG. We actually found support right at a pretty important momentum, a pretty important level on structure, sorry. And then we actually had a pretty strong reversal. You can see that the momentum turned green, and we had a pretty strong move to the upside. Then we had a pullback, and this pullback right here was a pullback right into support. You can see that the momentum found support right at that midline, which is the 50 line right here in my indicator, and then we saw a continuation to the upside. A lot of people were pretty bullish in UNG when it was trading near the highs, because it was trading near a pivot in a cup and handle setup. Now, what was happening below the surface? What was happening below the surface, which I think is really important to understand. Below the surface, you can see that UNG was basically consolidating here, but what was happening with momentum right here is that momentum was already starting to move lower. Now, what was the divergence that I saw in the momentum? You can see right here the price was moving to the upside, but momentum didn't make a higher high. So we saw a higher high in price right here, but we actually saw a lower high in the momentum. And what is really interesting, and it's something that I always try to, and it's something that I'm always trying to show people, to educate people in, is that momentum changes before structure. Momentum changes before structure. And I see this happening time after time after time after time, and it's actually pretty powerful. So what we saw here is that we had a higher high in price, a lower high in momentum. That's the first indication that this trend must be exhausted, must be getting to the point of exhaustion, meaning that we're not going to see a continuation higher, or better say, there's a low probability of us seeing a continuation higher. So what happened the moment that we had that divergence in momentum you can see right here that we actually started breaking below the EMA in the trend oscillator, and we were unable to hold above that very, very important level of structure, which is the kind of the brown line that I had here in my chart. So the moment that the momentum started to break below the EMA, after having that divergence in momentum, is my first indication that the trend might be getting exhausted and that we might be ready for a change in trend. So as you can see here, we had a very, very important level of structure at the low of this candle, which was 31.18. And what happened is the first day that we had a close below that level, which is this candle right here, that was a major break of structure because we had momentum divergence and then we had a break in structure. That's a sell signal in my system. And you can see that also price was starting to get rejected at that 8 exponential moving average, which is a very strong momentum exponential moving average. So what happened the next day? We had a flush, right? We had a gap down in UNG. And what happened here, and you can see this vertical line, which is my red line here, actually signal a sell signal in UNG, because now momentum is below that midline, meaning that we have more selling momentum than buying momentum, or more short momentum than long momentum, meaning that any retest of the previous structure is going to be an opportunity for me to take that as a short setup. And that's exactly what happened in UNG. You can see UNG right here. In the moment that we broke a structure completely, you can see that we actually retested that structure. And that was this day right here. So that's why it's really important to keep these levels on your chart. And that level was 31.18. The moment that we retested that structure, that's a clear signal that we have an opportunity to take the short in UNG. So now that you understand the setup, what was the trigger of the setup, let me show you how I traded. So I'm an end of day trader. I'm a swing trader, but I'm an end of day trader, meaning that I'm going to wait for the candle to close. I'm going to wait for the last, somewhere around for the last 30 minutes of the day to actually get into my position. And how I traded this, I traded UNG using the leverage ETF, the short leverage ETF, known as KOLD. So that's the 3X leverage short ETF, and the ticker symbol for that ETF is KOLD. Now, I'm always going to do my charting using the main trading vehicle, in this case UNG, but I'm going to trade it using the leverage ETF. So most of my charting is going to be using UNG, and then I'm going to execute it using KOLD. Now, let me show you the chart of KOLD. Let me show you the chart of KOLD, which I have right here. And of course, I do some analysis in the chart as well, but the most important thing is to do your analysis in the main ETF, because you're going to get a cleaner and you're going to get a higher probability trade using that ETF as your charting chart, basically. So you can see kind of the same thing in KOLD. We have this gap down right here. We have this gap down here on KOLD. And this was exactly the day that I entered, but I didn't enter this based on the chart of KOLD, right? I entered this based on the chart of UNG. And now let me show you my entry, which I have it right here. You can see the entry, which was, you can see the bot, right? Because this is a short ETF. That means that I bought the shares because they trade inversely to UNG. So I got long KOLD, and that means that I got short UNG. So I bought KOLD. You can see here that I bought KOLD at 10.20, right? That was the price that I bought it. And I bought it on September 14, which September 14 was, I think was on Wednesday. Let me check when was September 14. September 14 was on Wednesday of last week. And you can see that I bought it. I have this, this says 2:45, but I have a delay for my time zone. So this is basically 3:45, so 15 minutes right before the close on September 14. So I was waiting for the last 30 minutes to get my position. I bought it in the last 15 minutes of the day, and then I sold my position on September 16. I sold it actually at 9:14. Remember that I have a different time zone from New York. I sold it at 9:15 on September 16, and I sold it in pre-market action, and you can see it that I sold it on 12 at 1271, which is amazing, right? Because we actually saw a pretty strong move to the downside in UNG, and since KOLD is the 3x ETF or 2x, I think, I got a pretty strong move in my favor. So this was somewhere around a 24, right? Let me just write that again. This was somewhere around a 24.39% winner for this trade. So it was actually a pretty interesting trade, and it's such a really easy setup to find when you have the indicators that I have, and you actually only use market structure as your guide. So you can see that I shorted UNG by getting long KOLD right here on this day right here, which was the 14, and then I sold it somewhere around this level right here on September 16. So it was such a pretty easy setup. It was basically retest of a structure, trading it all the way back to the main structure, or to the new structure that is trying to form. And it's such a pretty easy setup to find. I find these setups every week. Every week there's a setup in some name that is forming using this very simple strategy, which is just basically market structure combined with momentum structure. And that's just the way that I trade those names. So thank you so much, guys, for watching. I hope this video was helpful. I always do my best to try to I always do my best to explain the setups that I'm watching. I do my best to explain how I execute these setups. And of course, the stop that I was using for this setup, I was using this candle right here, which is somewhere around here as my stop, because if we continue to move to the upside, that means that the market structure is changing. The moment that we gap down, I start to trail my stop, and then I will start using 3118 as my stop. That way, if this happens to bounce a little bit, I still have some room to keep myself in the trade, because it is working and I want to stay in this trade as much as possible, looking for that high probability target. Could UNG continue to the downside? Of course, but my target is always going to be the retest of that structure, because remember that your first target should be somewhere that the market already has been before, at least at the first test. So thank you so much, guys, for watching. Remember to like and subscribe. I hope that this explanation was helpful and that you can get a better understanding of how the markets trend, because the markets, they don't exactly trade on moving averages or I don't know, or any other kind of indicators. They actually just trade, or they can trade on moving averages, of course, depending on the type of market that we have. But most of the times, most likely, they're just going to trade on support and resistance levels, because those are actually the supply and demand levels that we have on a chart. And I have found a lot of success using the system that I'm showing to you right now. So thank you so much, guys, for watching. Remember to like and subscribe, and also make sure to follow me on my Twitter account, which is @Capital, in which I share a lot of these setups by the end of the day. That way you can get more ideas into your system as well, and we can also interact in the social media. So thank you so much, and that was it. Thank you. Bye bye. Peace.